So here's I also now I have added something to my requirements to marry somebody, and one is I just go ahead and put on there I will not do communion in the ceremony. I'm stunned by how many Baptists are now wanting to do this. First 20 years of my ministry, nobody ever asked me to do communion in a wedding ceremony, and now people are asking all the time. Well, we're Baptists, man. We're not Catholic, and that's not what communion is for. So that's like, well, would you serve communion to us? No, it's a church ordinance. You're not the church, and that comes from only one source, and that's Catholicism. And because the Catholics see it as a sacrament, and as I told you previously, they pile up sacraments because with more sacraments comes more grace. Marriage is a sacrament. Mass is a sacrament. So they serve Mass at weddings to the couple, and this gives them a little bit more grace. Well, that's not our view. So you want to do a lighting of candles or a prayer bench, or, I'm happy to do it, but we're not going to serve communion because that's a church ordinance. And I probably get half the weddings I do now that comes up. So I just went ahead and put it on the sheet so they know that I don't do that. So you ask about vows. Now there are a lot of resources out there now. With the internet, you can pull all kinds of stuff down. So I love ceremonies in like the Book of Common Prayer, the Book of Common Prayer, the Anglican wedding ceremony from who's the guy who wrote the book? Who did most of the Book of Common Prayer? Cranmer. Yeah, thank you. It's beautiful. I love those words, with my body I thee worship, with all my earthly goods I thee endow. That's just beautiful. I don't use that in my ceremony, but I like that. I use it sometimes in private with Tanya. I will say those words to her. But you can find different wedding ceremonies, and my ceremony pretty much the same, but think of it like modules. So I've got about 8 different modules in that ceremony, and I can plug them, move them around. So you begin with the dad walks in with the bride, who gives this bride in marriage. Her mother and I, they present, and then you come up on the platform. I begin the same way. We're gathered here today in the sight of Almighty God, and these witnesses to unite so-and-so and so-and-so. If you've come here for the purpose of uniting your lives in lifelong legal wedlock, please signify this intention by uniting your right hands. It was in the beautiful surroundings of the undefiled Garden of Eden that God himself united the first man and the first woman. It was there, mingled with the songs of the bird and the fragrance of the flower. I mean, I can do this thing all day. And, but I can move that around and plug it out. Then, when it comes to vows, there are 2 ways to do vows, and you can do both ways. So the wedding I had a couple weeks ago, I did both ways. And the first way is do you, Glenn, take Mackenzie to be your lawfully wedded wife? And you have these vows, and then at the end you say, do you? And he says, come on, guys, wake up. I do. Or you can repeat these vows after me. I, Glenn, take you, Mackenzie. And I always chop it up in little bite-sized pieces. If you give them too much, they're nervous. They're going to forget and drop the line. So I just chop it up real small. To be my lawfully wedded wife. To be my lawfully wedded. And I tell them in the rehearsal, now if you drop a line, I'll just give it to you again. So don't worry about it. Anyway, you just do that. Then you have, so after the vows, the exchange of rings, you have to learn a lot of this stuff. Like that's where she hands off her bouquet because she's going to need both hands to exchange rings. After the exchange of rings, I typically go into sort of mini sermonette. And my goal is to never have them up on the platform more than 20 minutes. Now, if they put songs in there, it stretches it. And I warn them against it. I like them that if they can put the songs before they're up there. But a lot of times they'll put one sung song in the ceremony. I don't know what it is, but I know that it happens. And that is people who aren't accustomed to standing up front in front of people in a ceremony, they lock their legs, they zone out, and they faint. I've had it happen at a lot of weddings. Now, I've sort of figured out how to keep it from happening now. So it hadn't happened to me in a long time. But I've had it all, man. I've had the ring bearer's puke, projectile vomiting. I mean, like you think his head's going to spin any minute, like the Exorcist, you know. And the worst one I ever had, the bride, everything in the wedding went wrong. I can't tell you. The ring bearer puked, and the flower girls were wandering all over the place. the whoever sang forgot the words or messed up and started crying and couldn't finish the song. Into the service, you know, when they present husband and wife, the bride goes down the stairs and her train catches this candelabra that's attached to the pew, yanks it down, and the glass chimney shatters everywhere. The wax somebody had to stomp the wax caught on fire and had to stomp it out. The matron of honor was like 8 months pregnant, and so she comes down. Then after they put that up, and you don't know what to do. Do you keep going or what? They put the fire out. She comes down the steps, trips, falls down in the shattered glass, gets up. Her hands are bleeding and all over. I mean, it looked like a scene from Carrie, you know, just blood everywhere. It was awful. It was just like terrible. Now that doesn't happen often, but you'll often have something go wrong. And I've learned to tell the couple, look, if something goes wrong, don't worry about it. That is what you'll remember. I mean, you don't remember anything from a perfect wedding, right? But you remember ring bearer puked. That's memorable. Somebody fainted. So if something happens, you just tell them to roll with it. Now, I do everything I can to preclude those things. And after you've done as many weddings as I have done, I know what to watch for. I'll tell you a few things. You write these down or watch them on the video. And when you do rehearsals, you warn them about them. One thing that frequently happens is, so when the father gives the bride away, and a lot of times he will lean over and kiss her, you know. Now remember, the mother of the bride sits on that side. The father escorts her down. He's on this side. So if he steps across her train and it's bunched out there, a lot of times that's a wider step that he's got. He's going to step on that train. At this point, she is moving forward to come up the steps with the groom, and here's what happens. Just yanks her head back. So I always ask them, does your dress have a train? And they say, well, not much. Not much means it's long enough to be there where the dad crosses over. So I always instruct the dad, look, you just take a step back and wait till they come on up, and then you sit down. So he's not trying to cross over behind her. He just hands her off, steps back, and waits for her to go. I also tell the bride, now, especially if you're up on a platform, a lot of times steps are steep. Some churches actually have steps that aren't normally there, but they've made steps for weddings, right? And a lot of times they make them steep, so you can have 4 steps instead of 5, save a little room. And a bride's foot will get caught on the inside of her dress as she's coming up those steps. So I always tell her at the rehearsal, now look, I know this feels weird, but I want you to reach way down, and I want you to pull that dress way up. Nobody can see it but me, and it's just going to show your knees. But and you have the groom grab her arm at the elbow instead of her trying to hook her arm through him, because then she can't use that hand. So she's got the bouquet in one hand, and she's got her other hand through his arm. She can't pull that dress up. So she holds the bouquet actually in her left hand, and with her right hand, she pulls her dress up to walk up those steps, and he just holds her at the elbow and lets her come up at her speed. And so since I've given these pieces of advice, that's never, the other stuff, the bad stuff's not happened. I always instruct a wedding party to make sure that they eat. A lot of times, especially women, wearing those dresses, they will have crash dieted for the last week, and they're not eating. And if the wedding, say, is at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, or sometimes later, and they've not eaten that day, their blood sugar is low, they will faint. It happens. And so I tell them, you've got to eat about an hour before the ceremony, get your blood sugar stabilized a bit. And I tell them to always face the bride, so they're facing out. When they come up and when they're out there, then when they come up, they turn in. I always tell the best man, if at any point in the ceremony somebody drops a ring, it's your job to get it. No one else is going to bend over. No one else is going to go for it. I don't care if it rolls to the back row. You're going to go get it. And I prep them to go get it. If the best man he typically has her ring. Sometimes the best man will have both rings. When I get to the part of the ceremony where he gives me the ring, I hold out my Bible and I tell him, if he's got her ring, it's a small ring compared to his hand. I want him to put her ring on his pinky above the knuckle. Don't push it down. He's going to hold out his hand like that, and I'm going to have my Bible underneath his hand. I'm going to take the ring off. I'm going to hold it up. I'm going to do my thing about, this ring is a circle. It has no end, and then give it to him. He's going to put it on her finger. I always coach them. When you're nervous, a lot of times your knuckles swell, and it will get stuck there. Just let her finish it and put it on up. Sure enough, the other day, a couple weeks ago when I had a wedding, I told them that. They laughed like, "Oh, that'll never happen." Guess what? It happened. Her knuckle was swollen, and he couldn't get it past there. She just finished it. And then when I take the ring from the maid of honor, I tell her to have his ring on her thumb, above the knuckle. She'll hold up her thumb. I'll just reach over, my Bible underneath it in case I drop it, and I'll hold it up, tog it, and give it to her. She puts it on him. After the exchange of rings is when I go into that something of a sermonette, if they're believers, which they almost always are, and I share the gospel briefly. Now, can I tell you something? I've been doing this a lot of years. I've never had anybody get saved at a wedding. That's another reason why I don't like weddings. I'd rather preach 10 funerals than do one wedding. Because people are listening at a funeral, and there are a lot of lost people at a funeral. Trust me on this. At a wedding, nobody's listening to you. They're not listening to you. They're looking at the bridesmaids and their dresses and their figures and the ring bearer and the little flower girls, and they're not listening to you. So another reason why I don't like weddings, I just think, nobody's listening. But I put the gospel in there. The gospel's always good. So I put it in there. And if they do a unity candle, you guys know what I'm talking about, the unity candle, at that point, do it. There's a new thing. Have you guys seen the sand? I don't really love the sand, but I'm not saying I won't do it. That was a new thing to me not too long ago. Unity candles are good. Sometimes they have a kneeling bench, and they kneel to pray. After the unity candle, sometimes they sing the Lord's Prayer, or I will pray and not say amen. They go into the Lord's Prayer. And then pretty much we're done. When I say amen, I say, now by the authority vested in me as a minister of the gospel and an agent of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, I pronounce you husband and wife. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Glenn, you may now kiss your bride. And the other thing, I tell them at the wedding rehearsal, you need to practice your kiss. Now, that sounds funny, but what I mean by that is you need to have the same idea of what that kiss is going to be. Because if you've ever been to a wedding where he had one idea of what the kiss was going to be and she had another, like he's going in for the gold, and she's, I mean, and if she has a startled look, it's just embarrassing for everybody. Like, don't bring that in here. My parents are watching. Uh, so they need to know what they want, how deep or romantic they want that kiss to be, but they need to have one mind on that. So I tell them, you just need to know what your kiss is going to be so that you got the same idea. And then she gets her bouquet back, and I turn them to the audience, and I say, now present to you Mr. and Mrs. And his name. By the way, this is York's rule, not a biblical thing. It's York's rule. I won't marry a couple if she's not taking his name. Now, that's just me. That I don't. There's no verse I point to and say there. You have to do that. I'm just saying. I just think that our culture needs a witness of what a Christian marriage looks like, and I really think her taking his name is a wonderful witness. I can't imagine my wife not taking my name. So I'm not opposed to it if that's not your rule. And I'm not saying that a couple that doesn't do that is ungodly and unscriptural. They very well may be very godly and very scriptural in every way, but they've just decided for her to not take his name. And I know there are lots of cultures in the world where that's not a thing. That's why it's an American thing. It's not a biblical thing. That's my rule. So, if it weeds out a few, I'm okay with that. So anyway, that's basically the way I run rehearsal. I'll warn you that wedding coordinators are the natural enemy of pastors. They just are aggravating. Now the ones that at my church, I don't mean that because they work with me and I know them. I'm talking about when I do, I recently did a wedding at a Presbyterian church in Lexington. They had their own wedding coordinator, and they just want control. I always listen and smile, and then when it gets down to the ceremony, I do whatever I want to do. And I tell the couple I'm going to do that. I've already worked this out. So, we were at the rehearsal the night, and the wedding coordinator was telling them this stuff, and I whispered to him, I said, we're not going to do it that way. I said, good. All right. Let her say whatever she wants, but at the end of the day, the only three people in this room are necessary. It's the bride and the groom and the preacher. And I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. So wedding coordinators, if they're not people from your church, you don't know, and they can really be in the way. But typically the way I do is I tell the wedding coordinator to get them up there where they're all going to stand in the ceremony, during the ceremony. And so our first rehearsal is with them in place. I go through the ceremony one time and have them exit the way they're going to exit. And then we rehearse it one more time, starting from the top, including their entrance, for them to get to the places where they've been lined up. And we rehearse it twice, the ceremony itself, but coming in only once. Make sense? All right, that's a crash course in wedding rehearsals and weddings. Corky? No, okay, good question. Do I go through the whole script? No, I just merely tell them at this point, I'm going to do it. Here's the vows, and then we do the rings, and I just walk them through the general contours of it, sort of my 8 modules of it. Now, somebody asked about what about if they want to do their vows? I would have no objection to them doing their vows as long as they're not unbiblical, and as long as, if I thought they were insufficient vows, we're going to do my vows too, right? But I would not do any vows that I think lessen the covenant. So if they say, well, we want to do vows as long as we both shall love. No, we're not doing that. I'm not even going to be a part of that ceremony, right? So if they're tinkering with the nature of marriage, it's out. But if they just want to do something that's poetic and loving, and I want to say, you're the light of my life, and all this mushy stuff, no problem. Just don't change the nature of of marriage and what you're promising. And typically, if they want to do those vows, then we'll still do the traditional vows too. Um, so, other questions about weddings and ceremonies? Yes, sir. Yeah, if they say we want to do our own vows, I'd want to see them. Absolutely. Yes, sir. Okay, great question. The question is, would it bother me to marry somebody in a setting outside of the church? And the answer is no. I've done it. I've actually done it many times. You know, there are really good and practical reasons to get married somewhere outside of a church, and just sort of scenic things. So I don't think so. I mean, I can imagine there are places I would not marry somebody, uh, but yeah, that in itself, it doesn't have to be in the church. I don't think you're necessarily saying something bad by getting married other than at a church building. Other questions? How many how many of you have ever married somebody? I have it. Anybody here had as many as say 50 weddings? Anybody had? How you doing, man? You decided you needed to learn how to pastor your church. Good, I'm glad. Uh, well, yeah, I don't know how many I've done. Uh, Brother Range, he always he could tell you how many people he baptized and how many people he married. I've never kept up with that stuff. So I'll figure it out in heaven. And um, but it's been a bunch. I've married an awful lot of people in this many years. But if I never married anybody again, I'd be okay with it. I don't know. I might want to marry my grandchildren, but I don't know that I can get through it. I cry at weddings. It's a problem for me. And it got to where people at church, both at Ashland Avenue and at Buck Run, sort of expect it. They almost want it. I've had people act when I didn't cry, like disappointed. You didn't cry. But if I start, it starts everybody else. And I try to hold it together. So I've got a little trick. And by the way, I use this trick on a lot of occasions. You got to get somebody you sort of channel. I watched, to me, Adrian Rogers was the model. I never saw Adrian mess up anything. He just always knew what to say, always knew what to do. He always had his dignity. So when I feel myself losing it, I just pretend I'm Adrian Rogers. It's like, okay, Adrian would do this. And it makes me get out of my own head because if I think about me, I'm thinking, York, you're losing it. This is so sweet, and this is love, and you love your wife so much, and they're going to have love, and I'm gone. So, but you can't just stand up there and blubber, which I could easily do. I cry at McDonald's commercials. I cry easily. So, figure out, know who you are, and figure out how to overcome those. That's not a weakness, but it's just a practical thing. You can't just stand up there and blubber, and when I lose it, it takes me a while to get it back. So that's my little trick. Channel Adrian. Adrian would never lose it. He's always, and it helps me. It's helped me on many occasions. So